Hello there, Commonwealth Realm here. We are in The Legend of Zelda's 35th anniversary. On February 21st, 1986, the Famicom was graced with Nintendo's Greatest Adventure series. But 2021 marks also for a few other anniversaries. The 30th anniversary of A Link to the Past, and the 15th anniversary of Twilight Princess, which could be a part of a Triforce collection that we detailed in our previous video. It is also the 10th anniversary of Ocarina of Time 3D, which also could be part of that collection. But most of all, it is the 10th anniversary of Skyward Sword, the Wii game that celebrated the 25th anniversary of the Legend of Zelda series with the Symphony of the Goddess, Hyrule Historia, and the unveiling of the official timeline in 2011. Now 10 years later, we have another installment in the Zelda series in the works at the very bottom of the timeline that Skyward Sword begins. And the reason for Skyward Sword HD are many. The strongest of which is that Wind Waker HD was released 10 years after the GameCube Classic, and Twilight Princess HD 10 years after the dual release of that game on the GameCube and the Wii. Now it's Skyward Sword's turn as the only post-Nintendo 64 console Zelda game to still have not been HD'd. We've been waiting long, but it appears that Nintendo might have done this deliberately to keep Breath of the Wild as a mystery and its sequel as the game that will deliver answers and resolutions to the questions raised in Breath of the Wild, but also Skyward Sword. The origin story of the franchise, and from which all games derive from, and which is the perfect title for Nintendo to update for a $60 release on the Nintendo Switch. But why such a long wait? There are a few reasons. Number one, and probably most obvious, is that the Wii U was a complete and utter failure for Nintendo by the time Twilight Princess HD was released in early 2016. Secondly, this game isn't exactly the easiest to transition for undocked play due to its originally being entirely designed for Wii Motion Plus controls. And altering these is a far more difficult task than updating graphics and simplifying Wind Waker's Triforce shard quests or adding a Swift Save. Let me explain, as controls and some other annoying bits of this game are what we will talk about the rest of this video, with a little about why this game is so important to get out before Breath of the Wild 2 before we end this video. The story in Skyward Sword doesn't require altering, as it is among the best in the series. The same goes with the dungeons, but the controls must be dealt with in order to play the game on the Nintendo Switch Lite, which is not dockable, has no detachable Joy-Cons and no kickstand. And yes, this model matches, as it has in a little over a year sold almost as much as the Wii U in total. That is to say, 13.53 million units, and could surpass 15 million by Zelda's 35th anniversary on February 21st. Naturally, there are over 65 million base model Nintendo Switches out there that are dockable, have detachable Joy-Cons and kickstands, but even then, it's a remake of a motion-controlled only Zelda, good for a system that even before the Switch Lite released was played undocked by a clear majority of players. Not really. And as such, if they're working on a Skyward Sword HD, Nintendo must have considered offering two modes of Skyward Sword HD. Original that can only be played with motion controls on the Joy-Cons, and the new without motion controls, outside of the gyroscope for some sections. This way, letting veterans and newcomers play the game in a completely new way, and even with the Switch Pro controller. After all, the Wiimote and Nunchuck only had 4 action buttons, compared to Nintendo Switch's 8 buttons. Plus, minus, and home button, plus D-pad and power button. And yes, the Wii had 1 plus 2 buttons, but these were unusable when playing together with the Nunchuck, aka when playing Skyward Sword on the Wii and Wii U. The compensation for the lack of buttons was the built-in Wii Motion Plus and gyroscope, which also served as your second analog stick in sections of the game which required both movement and camera control. On top of that, we can't forget that many puzzles, enemies and even bosses in this game were designed to be solved using specific directional movements, as opponents would block attacks like in a real-life battle. This was a great feat in 2011, but is definitely a challenge to rework for a traditional controller scheme. Lack of dual analog controls could also prove to be a bigger issue, as the world was specifically designed so you wouldn't need them. In other words, we could see criticism for its very corridored and limited design that might not translate as well when we are not moving around the controller like we did on the Wii and can do with the Joy-Cons. There's also a certain moment after the second to last dungeon in Skyward Sword that, much like Wind Waker's original Triforce shard quest, is way too long, tedious, and was criticized even back in 2011. We have moved 10 years since then and had a graphical, controller, and gameplay revolution for 3D Zelda experiences. with full or near full dual analog camera controls in Wind Waker HD, Majora's Mask 3D, Twilight Princess HD, Breath of the Wild, Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition, and most recently Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. As such, not having dual analog camera controls for a 3D HD Zelda experience on the Switch will be a downgrade from all Zelda experiences since 2013. Even 2015's Majora's Mask 3D had dual analog camera controls through the Circle Pad Pro and the new Nintendo 3DS. And that is the main challenge with making a Skyward Sword HD that will not feel like a pain in 2021. The game's overall world, enemy, and puzzle design. And to be completely fair, I'm not sure if Nintendo is willing to take such a big undertaking while also working on Breath of the Wild 2. It is even easier to upscale Ocarina of Time 3D to HD for a Triforce collection and add dual analog controls, as they have already pulled it once with this engine in Majora's Mask 3D. But for Nintendo, Skyward Sword's 10th anniversary combined with Zelda's 35th anniversary and this game's story importance for say Breath of the Wild 2 might be enough to warrant such a massive overhaul of the game. Also that they can sell the game to not 65+ million but potentially 80+ million Nintendo Switch and Switch Lite owners, and probably boost sales as the people who didn't enjoy the motion controls or extra cost due to the Wii Motion Plus requirement would then come in this time around. What is the most important priority for Nintendo when it comes to a proper remake? That it sells, and if an alternative mode with a traditional controller layout will accomplish that goal, then they are likely to go for it. Personally, I will say that if Nintendo are currently making a Skyward Sword HD and following this more difficult but potentially more rewarding path, then I am mighty impressed. It will definitely result in higher sales and probably a much higher popularity, even without Breath of the Wild's open world, non-linearity, and freedom. See a nice break of pace and a reminder of what Zelda was before the big open world or open air leap with Breath of the Wild before Breath of the Wild 2 comes out. Coming out before Breath of the Wild 2, you say. But when would that release have to be if the next Zelda game comes out in 2021? Personally, I believe it has to be in the range of May, June, or July. That will mark for a potential 4 to 6 month long gap between the two titles this year and the start of the anniversary in say March with the reveal of Skyward Sword HD. This one, as a remake, could easily be published as a tweet or YouTube upload like Nintendo did with Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity last year. Then get another trailer in a Nintendo Switch presentation where you also show more of Breath of the Wild 2. Actually, the more I think of it, the more it seems that Skyward Sword HD is the only Zelda title that can come out during this 35th anniversary if Breath of the Wild 2 is coming out this year. But if it turns out that the new title slips to 2022 and is close to Breath of the Wild's 5th anniversary, then we could see Skyward Sword HD and Zelda Triforce Collection this year. To me, that would be a great compensation that allows us to play through the series' most important titles and the story that leads up to Breath of the Wild and its sequel. And in fact, this is a very fitting spot to conclude this 3-part miniseries about Zelda 35th anniversary games, as we want to keep this one realistic while also highlighting the challenges, needs, and benefits from 3 different releases: Breath of the Wild 2, a Zelda Triforce Collection, and Skyward Sword HD. If you enjoyed the video, please like and share it, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the Commonwealth Realm as we continue our coverage and topical videos on Zelda's 35th anniversary, along with Breath of the Wild 2 and Zelda theories. To not miss any of these, press that notification bell and again for all notifications. Finally, a big thanks goes to all our patreon.com/commonrealm patrons, and in particular our royal producer Charles Shash. Till the next upload, please enjoy one or both of these 2 awesome videos.